Crazy as it may sound, it's pretty fitting that one of the late highlights of the NES library was an action game where you got to control a gravity-flipping mecha. Honoring the platform's reputation of old-school difficulty, Metal Storm wanted to plunge gamers of 1991 into the distant future of 3521, tasking them to breach a savage space colony on the planet Pluto, built with stupefying layouts and enemy mechanisms stationed in all sorts of irregular spots. So it's appropriate that the only way you could tackle such an alien zone is with a mobile robo that essentially acts like an insect, clinging onto ceilings and sniping at angles that are the most convenient for them. The gravity flipping mechanic is a more freeform action than anything else you'd find in an 8-bit platformer. And yet, I find it interesting that this game is still a ball-bustingly hard time despite this innovation. The first level of the game invites the sort of freedom with the move that you'd expect. You can flip gravity to flip your enemies around. There are a few sections where you have to reach a tight spot by being at the right polarity, but generally it feels very loose and experimental, optional for the sake of style. But the game is very quick to put you through hell with this move. Level 2 is a straight up maze where switching gravity activates door latches that can splice you upon impact. You have to carefully coordinate the right places to do a switch, while navigating safely in whatever polarity you find yourself in. Level 3 puts the pressure with bots that spawn on a rail system, and sections where the upside down route with right side up spike beds are the only way to make it through. 4 boxes you into an auto-scroller that moves in a preset track. You can't always stay on the ground, as enemies and fixed droids are bound to get in your way. When put into perspective, Metal Storm is pretty tough, but surprisingly fair for an NES game. Its difficulty isn't about compromising a raw avatar or adapting through curveballs or trial and error, but by pushing the creative limits of what your character and their specialty are capable of. I do, however, sympathize with the feeling that the game could have used some more freeform levels like level 1, where you're not coaxed into using the gravity flip to survive, but simply to use it as an experimental tool to craft cool shortcuts or gameplay moments of your own around its design. I bring this up because I do think the bosses have this sort of leeway. It can be optimal to use gravity flipping to fight them, but it never feels like you absolutely need to. The game lets you toy with their arrangements and see what solutions you can possibly derive. But the majority of Metal Storm is a rigid playset. You gotta thread the needle around in the way that it sees fit. If it came out in any other time, especially as it released on the same year as the more advanced Super Nintendo would make the rounds, this would feel pretty limiting. But as a closure to 8-bit game design, I think this works great. I like that the game has a cool, science-y gimmick with a fun, amenable sense of weight to it for a change, what would be a one-time stage gimmick for any other 8-bit game, being a core feature with multiple usages here, that also isn't afraid to make it your trump card against a classic, volatile 8-bit obstacle course, advancing the player experience, as this generation was bound to do, while also paying tribute to an arcade sense of challenge. In other words, an NES action game with a genuine skill ceiling. Even run-and gunplay feels more classy than most others of the past. You're not a cowboy spreading bullets into the air and wasting away lives. You're a tactical unit optimizing your course. And hey, with Metal Storm under the NES belt, it would only take 2 more years for an NES game to yet again star an advanced technical android that would tear through a futuristic universe in a liberating fashion. And that game would be called Kirby's Adventure. But of course, the other reason why Metal Storm's mecha feature works is that it makes for a fantastic production. The alien corridors are a visual marvel, with some bold color choices and some pretty impressive scrolling backgrounds, enhancing the feeling of delving deeper and deeper into a foreign war zone that could ideally span much farther than the 2D plane you're limited to. It even threatens to hypnotize your focus at times with how layered the environment design appears, which may not be the best excuse for not being able to distinguish stray bullets from the background, but still, if you are making a game about invading complex techno landscapes, You might as well go all out with it visually, and Metal Storm delivers. The highlight though is the excellent mecha design for the M308 gunner, standing taller than any stigma of ironic bad 80s box art. I really like the headless design they went for here. It gives the mecha a humanoid beetle kind of energy, which is fitting for a robo that behaves like a fly on the wall. Really sticks out from the tall giants with armored helmets you typically see from mechas for the rest of that decade, and in a way, a nice send-off to the more grounded military mechas you'd see from the 80s. Also yes, that's my name inspiration on screen, especially when you consider how advertising for the game actually tried to market the robot with a conventional helmet, which ended up making it look pretty tacky and a borderline ripoff. No, this design is super slick, and translates pretty well to a Mega Man-sized sprite, one that you control like a precise humanoid in gameplay. It's aged like fine wine, to a point that Nintendo Power advertised the game like they were selling a mecha model, with a makeshift toy replica of the M308 taking the front cover, and then, years later, it earned its reprint collector's edition that proudly boasts this figure in all sorts of physical memorabilia. In 1991, you could count the amount of localized mecha anime on one hand, and just localized anime in general. So getting a game in the West cut from the same cloth as that niche must have been pretty enthralling. But in recent years, Metal Storm fits great with the legacy and nostalgia of mecha media. And we're now able to get a better glimpse of how Metal Storm actually turned out in its native Japan release. That's right, we have some regional differences with this game. Gravity Armor Metal Storm in Japan featured a cool animated intro to set the stage of the adventure, some more stark color choices to sprites and environments, and quite an ending, which we'll get into shortly. The North American release cuts the game's original name in half, cuts the intro sequence, tones down some of the colors, and makes a few obstacles easier than the Japanese release. Playing both versions back to back, thanks to a translated ROM hack of the Japanese version by user SilverX, I didn't really notice too much of a difference from level to level. That is, until I got to the final level. The last obstacle course of the game involves slow-moving platforms that scroll up to the sky and loop from the bottom. But the Japanese release has these electric fences on the top and bottom, forcing you to think fast when it comes to maneuvering from platform to platform. While the North American version omits these fences and actually lets your gunner loop with the platforms from the top and bottom. Honestly, from a gameplay perspective, this one level is what makes me prefer the North American version. The Japanese take is quite a sticky feat, which is appropriate for the end of the game, but I feel more comfortable with the freedom that the localized version goes for. In a way, it feels like the game goes full circle this way, with the freedom that the first level showed, then offering that experimental value in the game's last challenging course. That said, there is quite a big difference with how both versions end. Not really the actual endgame though. It's kinda underwhelming that Metal Storm ends with a boss rush of previous fights, and then drops you into this climactic moment to strike down Pluto once and for all. I would have liked one more juicy original boss to top the game off, but it at least lets you get the job done in a nice playable cinematic moment. But now that you've destroyed the rogue Pluto from destroying the galaxy, what happens now? Well, in the Japanese version, the epilogue is actually pretty dire. The Earth was saved from a most serious crisis, yet man does not stop sowing sorrow. The history of the human race has been that of battles, and who can tell whether mankind will henceforth desist from harming the Mother Cosmos. Unless he mends his ways, man had better be all wiped out. It all depends on the peacekeeping efforts by each of you, whether this success in the mission will really prove good for all the living in the universe. Jeez. And here's the one for North America. Leaders from the Earth Nation will now bestow upon you a reward greater than any medal, and more valuable than all the golds known to man. You have earned everlasting life. Yes, your courage has won you immortality. Now it is your duty to return to the cosmos and protect the more vulnerable Earthlings from future alien attacks. Hang tough. I think it's safe to say, as someone who's consumed a lot of mecha-based sci-fi media, that the Japanese ending is the real deal, and the North American one is basically pulling stuff out of its ass Who and how did I get this immortality from? Maybe they mean it in a more metaphorical sense, like they're going to create a statue out of me to physically manifest my voyage and impact for all of time. But it mostly just feels like I've lost the privilege to die without my consent. Like the Earth is forcing me back into the Garden of Madness, knowing that everyone in the universe but me will find paradise. But for as alarmingly dreary as the Japanese ending sounds, it's honestly one that I jive with quite a bit. For one thing, it's my favorite kind of ending for a medium like video games. It's not over yet. Yeah, you beat the game we dared you to, but that doesn't mean your crusade as a gamer is all said and done from here, buddy. The war rages on. Another way you could take it is like a startling snap back to reality after all your fun and games are done. Like you just took part in a fictional experience about saving the Earth from disaster, so you better put your money where your mouth is and keep it that way in reality. More appropriately though, is that this is the perfect encapsulation of this game, and what its mecha featuring brand is capable of. Mechas are the signifiers of rapid human acceleration, but also the euphemism for the hardships and downfalls of living in such a foregone civilization. From a creative sense, they are projects with vast scopes and pinpoint precision, but not always based in big budgets, but mostly come down to sheer hobbyist talent and a penchant to express in both subconscious and underhanded ways. So an 8-bit game like Metal Storm ending on the contemplation of human existence makes absolutely perfect sense to me. And knowing that someone had that sort of message and pathos in mind when crafting this game, its world, and its game design chops, really makes me respect the passionate craftsmanship of it. Like any damn good mecha production, Metal Storm is something to behold for both its innovative challenge and visual finesse, a heartfelt mecha project that wants to sell its highs and TMIs on any medium or budget it possibly can, a true triumph of an NES game.